If you live in Los Angeles, then you've noticed the increasing number of new luxury buildings going up as well as gentrified neighborhoods with the new and trendy restaurants. Typically, these are considered signs of a strong, improving economy, of signs of prosperity and improvement. However, in addition to these so-called signs of success, there is also one huge sign of a massive systematic failure. I'm talking about the ever-increasing homeless population, including right here in Koreatown. We here at the Ktown Social Club want to learn more about what's going on, so we invited a few guests to help educate and inform us about the reality of homelessness in Los Angeles, what's being done about it, and what we as individuals can do. Joining us today is Nguyen, co-founder of Ktown For All, a volunteer-led grassroots organization serving Ktown's homeless community members. We're also joined by Kwon, a local writer, Ktown resident, and a member of Ktown For All. Last but not least, we are also joined by Theodore Henderson, houseless advocate, educator, and host of the podcast We the Unhoused. Thank you so much for joining. And let's get right started. I would like to talk about, I want to first learn, okay, so what's going on in terms of numbers? What are the rates looking like? Are they going up?
Well, in Koreatown, according to the last LA homeless count, it's around 600 homeless people in Koreatown, but I feel like it probably has gone up based on what we're seeing when we do our weekly outreach. And 2 years before, it was around 380 something. So it went from 300 something to like around 600 people in just 1 year, and it's definitely going up.
Okay, so what would you say that we're looking at in the next 5-10 years?
Well, if we're not taking drastic action to provide more affordable housing, it's only going to increase.
Okay, so unless things change, it looks like things are going to worse, right?
Yeah,
I think simultaneously we should be mindful of the ways that the city will try to obstruct the way that homeless counts are being conducted. I think that, well, the homeless count is actually being conducted leading up to the count for 2020 later sometime around May or June, which means the count starts now. And you're finding different ways that, not just in Koreatown, but in different neighborhoods where the city will come in with a sweeps team or whatnot to try and move unhoused people away from their current homes, to try and to mar the numbers so that, I don't know, maybe it'll look like it'll be less than last year, you don't know. But those are just the different ways that the city will also kind of come in to try and change the numbers.
Yeah. I think if you're going to use the homeless count to measure the quantitative changes from year to year, you really need to ensure the accuracy of the homeless count.
Right.
And last year, on the same day as the homeless count in Koreatown at the largest homeless encampment, there was a major sweep in which 5 tents were thrown out. And that led to a decrease of 13 people in District 13. So in terms of the actual concrete numbers, perhaps we may not see much of a change, but visually and just based on our personal experiences of doing outreach, there has been an increase.
We're also neglecting a very important part of it about when these sweeps does. When you have these sweeps, many of the unhoused are what I could say, for want of a better word, in the closet. That means they hide or they don't want to be known that they're unhoused. So 600 may be a charitable number, but if you're penalizing or criminalizing them, they're going to do everything in their power to hide or fly under the radar. So.
Now, while on this subject, do you have any insight or personal experience of how, as an unhoused individual, how you felt the city treats the unhoused?
Well, as I am unhoused, so to be clear, and it's this is a perfect opportune time to talk about how I became unhoused. I became unhoused because I became ill, and I didn't just one day decide to live out on the sidewalk because it was the thing to do. But I do know that societal biases help push the policies. For example, if someone doesn't like unhoused people because they think unhoused people are criminals or drug addicts or any kind of other nefarious ideas that they have in their mind, they usually call the police or their local council members because they feel that they're taxpayers. And thus, that begins the whole brutal cycle of being swept, because I've been swept, I've had my things confiscated, I've had my name run into the background check for so many times because of the the imaginations of people who believe because you're in the park or you're just trying to survive that you have to be up to no good, just not because of your living situation, but you just are just criminal.
Okay. Now, I think what you just said about the response from the public and just the general mindset that the public has is a good talking point right now because I think we've seen a lot of backlash to the movement in K-Town, right? Especially from the Korean community themselves. That there's been some, at least on social media, there's been some circulating videos from pretty strong opposition. And so, from you guys' experience, how have you experienced the opposition compared to support from K-Town? So, what has that been looking like?
Well, Ktown For All emerged out of the homeless shelter fight. So we formed to counter-protest the protesters who were opposing the proposed homeless shelter in Koreatown. And so we started out by trying to push back against that narrative and trying to humanize homelessness, trying to bring like a more compassionate narrative. And so when we first started out, it was pretty scary, honestly, just facing a lot of angry people who just were resistant to that narrative and who just didn't want to understand and didn't want to approach it from a compassionate perspective at all. But through weekly outreach that we do, we've brought in so many people who otherwise wouldn't think of homelessness and wouldn't even ever approach someone who's experiencing homelessness. So we've had volunteers from the community come in, join us for outreach every Saturday, and we go up to homeless encampments or individuals who are unhoused, provide them with whatever supplies that we have, water, hygiene, and then through that interaction, people get to know their unhoused neighbors and they learn about the circumstances and what they're experiencing, and that transforms people's perspectives. So I think there has been a shift in attitudes in Koreatown, but I think there's so much more education that needs to be done because the mainstream media unfortunately pushes a really harmful narrative that stigmatizes homelessness, and Lisa and Theo can speak more on that.
Right. So I mean, I would love to know how the media has been covering this, how if it's shifted the coverage.
Yeah.
What's that?
I believe that right now what Los Angeles suffers from the most is that despite our status and our largeness, we do suffer as a news desert. There are only very few, if not one, mainstream news outlet to give us all the coverage that we need about the issues on a local level. And yet those come, like when it comes to topics of homelessness, it is just littered with so much stereotypes around, and also misinformation about homelessness. I mean, latest from November, from one of the LA Times' reporter that covers homelessness, had a lot of facts about had a story about how a lot of the homeless population comes from transplants or from people who are not from here, when in reality, the fact is that there are plenty of unhoused residents in Los Angeles who've lived here for over a decade. It's complete misinformation that no one would think twice to dive deeper about, because this is the reliable paper that we have. I think also a lot of the issue right now is that our mainstream papers, or a lot of our alternative weeklies and a lot of the underground reporters have suffered from cut in budgets or funding, and it allows us, but also the benefit to that, it allows people to cover the issues themselves. And Theo has kind of taken the matters into his own hands. I think we're all exhausted and angered by just the ways that the reporting is so skewed that often we rely on the people who have the great perspectives, or who are who are leading from the margins to really share the stories.
Okay. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about your podcast, We the Unhoused? What kind of perspectives are you offering?
Well, We the Unhoused comes from a frustration that I had. I had exhausting conversations with a lot of my friends about the same stereotypes about unhoused people. And I was on my long, laborious journey trying to educate them. And the genesis of the idea says, okay, this is just a slice of what the humanity is, because when I'm getting harassed by the police, these are the narratives that they're repeating to them when they are telling me these things. So as a result of that, and then I started talking to a lot of the unhoused friends, we were getting tired and we were getting frustrated. So we like, okay, enough's enough. We need something. You know, there got to be some kind of way to get our message across that for people that really want to know, this is, we the Unhoused is a contextual experience based on unhoused people or formerly unhoused people's experience. We don't finger wag, we don't judge them, we don't use the same stereotypes. Well, why don't you just pick yourself up by your bootstrap,
Right.
and all that kind of thing? Or if you didn't do this drug, then you wouldn't be out here on the street. We have a whole diverse swath of people that are unhoused, from the elderly who have lived on fixed income and maybe had a $50 increase and no familial support, and they're on the street. We have the ones that, the young woman who is HIV positive, and they are telling her to get a job, but she cannot because she has her lapse of illnesses, or she's debilitated. So those things are just a small slice of the conversations I've had with unhoused people.
What I like what you brought up about the whole, just work hard and get yourself back up thing.
Right.
So can you just can you debunk one or two myths that people think about the unhoused, why they're unhoused, and what the reality actually looks like?
A more visceral example is me. I am a college-educated man. I have finished my undergraduate degree. I have a few credits towards my master's, and I was an educator. And many people, when they communicate with me, they are very surprised that I'm unhoused. They flounder for the right response. Well, if you just do this and this and this, you'll be back on your feet. You're not like one of them. But I tell them all the time, I'm just one of many of these examples. I got ill, and trying to support yourself while you're ill without any family support or enough of the financial resources, because healthcare is ridiculous here. One can become unhoused very quickly. All it takes is a debilitating illness, which unfortunately I had. So.
Okay, and on the last question on this note, I seem to notice a difference in the usage of homeless and unhoused. So can you tell us a little bit about what those two words mean?
Those terms mean everything to unhoused community. For so long, due to the stereotypical messages that's been out there, when we see homeless or vagrant or transient or hobo, is usually used as a pejorative. It's spat at the unhoused community, and it's used. It never augurs well for them. It's always usually on the tip of the tongue of a police officer or a council member that's usually ready to impose a new ordinance against them, and there it loses its agency. And when we're trying to do, and there are some opponents against this, but they're, for the most part, the unhoused releases or returns the agency to people that are marginalized or displaced, and to give them the dignity to feel that, yes, just because I'm out here without a structural, foundational apparatus doesn't mean I've lost my humanity or my skills and abilities.
Right, okay. Thank you so much. And before we move on to what's going on now, I think a lot of people are wondering, okay, so we've heard noise about the Ktown homeless shelter. So can you tell us exactly what happened, what was proposed, and what ended up happening?
Yeah, I guess I can speak to that because, I learned about it from a Curbed article in which they announced that there's going to be a homeless shelter at 682 Vermont, which is Vermont and 7th. And when I first saw that article, I thought, okay, great, the city is finally doing something, even though it's a very minor effort, like a 70-bed shelter. That's hardly much, but it's great that the city is finally doing something. And so I was really appalled when there were protests against it. And so the first weekend that there was a protest, I saw on Twitter that one person had counter-protested, and his name is Johnny Lee. He's a business owner in Koreatown. And when I saw that, I contacted Johnny and I said, okay, next week I'm gonna join you. And so it was me, a few others, I think it was around 8 of us, and Johnny, and we showed up to the protest and we counter-protested, and we held signs like Koreatown, choose love, or housing for all. And ever since that day, we have been organizing ever since. And yeah, we decided that it's so much more important to involve and include the experiences of people who in Koreatown who are currently homeless, because their voices were being left out of the conversation. I mean, as housed people, it's fine that we are advocating for solutions, but it's really important that we actually talk to people who are currently experiencing homelessness in Koreatown and see what their perspectives on this, because they were not consulted during the protests.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that actually brings a question when it comes to voting for such policies, right? What does voting look like for the unhoused?
That's an excellent question. For so long, one of the things, the downsides of these sweeps is that you continually get records or citations, and because the unhoused financial situation is not what it should be, they becomes warrants, and eventually you bench warrants, or they're trying to use that as a tactic to silence unhoused people.
I'm sorry, the unhoused get citations?
Yes, they get cited because of the 5611, for the ones that don't know, and 4118. Those are the criminalized focus points that the city empowers the police to go after unhoused people for. For example, if you don't like an encampment near Radio Korea or Ktown Social Club, you call 311 or the police, and they'll go out and they will hassle the person, or if that person's a repeat person, they will cite them for 5611 or 4118, and then it becomes a cycle. That ticket will go unpaid because unhoused people do not have the financial wherewithal to pay that, and then it becomes a warrant. Because now that's another issue where if you have too many of those, then you may lose your ability to vote. Where unhoused people that don't have that, we have trying to let them know that they are constituents of the community, just as housed residents, and they have the same rights. It looks a little different. You can use your phone to vote now. You can use, there's some other agencies, like for example, About My Father's Business, and I and a couple of other agencies are getting together to compile different unhoused people, get them transport to go to the voting places in their areas so they can vote. And many of them may not have IDs, but you don't need an ID. You just need the park address or a cross street in order for you to vote. So those little important details are what unhoused people have to use in order for them to vote.
That's crazy. So you're saying that it's almost like the system's built so that homeless people pretty much cannot. It's working against the unhoused.
Because the society has this viewpoint, and this goes back all the way from the 1800s. The society has drank into the narrative of unhoused people as hobos or ne'er-do-wells. And we have drank it in because we are a puritanical society. And we have been educated that if we go to school, we follow the rules, and we do what we're supposed to do, then everything is going to be okay in the world of happy land of capitalism. However, reality forever intrudes, and then because life captures you with different issues, illnesses, family financial issues. For example, me, I'm from African American descent. Our financial wealth system is not as stable as perhaps my lighter hue compounders or white counterparts. As most importantly, as well, as our system here had the chattel slavery, Jim Crow, and segregation and voters' rights suppression directly impacting African Americans, which culminated into the voting rights of 1965, which still to this day, they still go out of their way to suppress African American voters in other areas. So that plays another wrench into the wheel as well.
So it looks like boots on the ground, the police, enforcers of the law are not, to say the least, sympathetic to the homeless. Now, top of the level, city hall, mayor, would you say that the city cares? And by city, we mean our city leaders.
That's a loaded question. I guess what I can say is that voting in the next primary is so important.
Okay.
Short of what your issues are, the thing is, this is where it matters. If you are unhappy with the current incumbent sitting officials, you have the choice to go out there and be informed about the other running candidates for your different districts and the different propositions that are out there, and really get informed and start talking to people. I'd say March is very, very important.
Okay, and thank you. Now we've seen new names. There's been Grace Yu for City Council. There's Jake Jung for LA County. Are there any names that we should be watching out for support their policies?
From the unhoused perspective, I would say it is incumbent for the unhoused community and the unhoused to say to look out for people that have anti-unhoused and anti-black sentiment. Grace Yu and Jake Jung has forever offered my Christmas card list, if you will, because of them offending my culture by saying that they are, or people around them saying that they are the MLK of the Korean movement or the Rosa Parks. And that, at the end of my episode of It Really Unhoused, I talk about Harry Moore. And this gentleman and his wife were the first martyrs of the civil rights movement. At the time where they faced insurmountable pressure from not to get people to vote, African Americans. They were reporting lynchings, they were threatened, and then on Christmas of 1951, they had died from a bomb explosion under their bed. And so when they say these things, because they were fighting for the equality for all to have that right to have a say in their own destiny. And so when they were to come back and besmirch their memory, like Beggar Evans, he got shot in his back while his wife and kid were coming out to greet him for getting people to register to vote. So to allow the community to continue to spread that is very, very offensive to the African American community.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, okay, so full disclosure, I do photography and graphics for Nithya Raman's campaign. She's running for City Council District 4, but she is a leader on homelessness issues because she co-founded CELA, and she has also written a report that analyzes the funding of the city's budget on homelessness and how so much of that money was going to criminalization and things that don't work. So in CD10, there's Ara Vasquez, who also advocates for compassionate solutions. And it's not just about compassion, it's about solutions that actually work. So criminalization sets people back on their path to housing. If people lose their documents and their property, they have to spend time trying to retrieve that and to build their lives up. Instead of seeing their caseworker, instead of trying to get their life together so that they can then transition off the streets, they have to focus on basic survival because the city makes it so difficult for people to transition out of homelessness. And so we need evidence-based solutions at the city level. And we have to look at the decades of failed criminalization policy and how that hasn't helped at all. We're seeing homelessness skyrocket. And so we have to question these policies in which it's exacerbating the housing and homelessness crisis. Okay,
now from what you've said, and just generally I think we can all agree that homelessness is not, a very popular topic for, let's say the average person with a stigma involved and everything. So now for Ktown For All, how has the fight, the struggle, it has been an uphill battle in terms of organizing. Maybe there's opposition in terms of short-term, long-term goals. So what can you guys tell us about those things about Ktown For All?
I think why I joined Ktown For All just about a year ago was the sort of organic one-to-one way that Ktown For All was talking to individuals who are living in Koreatown and beyond. It seemed a very accessible organization for anyone to get involved. Like short of very sensationalized headlines, there are people who are just kind of see through the BS now and we're wanting to talk to people like directly. So Ktown For All kind of evened out that sort of like noise and also was that sort of came from a very humane standpoint where they just wanted to talk to you about homelessness. But I think the allure of just wanting to get involved, lack of better words, allure, is just the one-to-one-ness of it. And so if you want to come and if you don't like what you see and you see that something is wrong, like if you go down the streets of Ktown and you feel very concerned and very stressed out and you don't know what to do, Ktown For All was there to come do your weekly outreach. It was a very steady rhythm to which you can get involved. And from there you start to learn a lot more because maybe you're connected to them on Twitter, or maybe you start talking to people face to face. That sort of organicness really helped, I think, Ktown For All be at where it's now, where people are just genuinely starting to get interested, short of anyone else kind of like being like, you have to get involved, like you have to figure out a solution, like start with Ktown For All.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the appeal of Ktown For All, is that we're just a bunch of neighbors. All of us are volunteers, none of us get paid to do any of this. And none of us are professionals in the homeless services industry. We kind of approach the homelessness as we're neighbors, and we should check in on our unhoused neighbors and see how they're doing. And so Ktown For All has grown from a protest of like 8 people. We now have like hundreds of members, I would say. And it's a vital educational opportunity to talk to people who are currently unhoused. And you learn so much about what we can do to advocate for policy solutions. For example, just talking to someone, you will know that the city doesn't provide bathrooms, or the city is not emptying garbage cans, and so people are left to empty garbage cans at their encampments, and how the city is not cleaning the sidewalks, but they're forcing people to move for the superficial reason of public health and cleanliness. But so I think just grounding policy advocacy in the actual daily experiences of people who are currently unhoused is the most important thing that we do.
I like the point where you said, which kind of counters the argument when I've heard someone mention that why are you involving yourself in Korea or Koreatown and things like that. The unhoused community is the most diverse community there is, from trans, from Korean, from every other slice of piece of people, of humanity there is. And it's incumbent of all of us, not just only Koreans, but all of us as in the human race, to concern themselves and get out and do something about it, instead of getting off into a xenophobic kind of enclave and trying to minimize or invalidate the experience of what this crisis really is. It affects everyone, not just only a certain slice of people.
So it seems to me that one of the principal problems with this situation is that there's a disconnect from what we call society and the unhoused. It's almost like an us and them situation. And so for this movement, how should we go about connecting, bridging the them unhoused and us, the housed society?
I would like to say that there have been some strides made. For example, I would like to use the example of episode 9 where I covered Echo Park Lake. Where before a few years ago there is still some antipathy against the unhoused, but there are now community members that I've witnessed have started to speak out against when a NIMBY or someone starts to harass unhoused people. But a couple of Saturdays ago, we had a block party where housed and unhoused people got together and they came and had a party, music, and things like that to tell them that they were a part of the community and they have someone there to have their back. So if they have like police officers or things like that coming to do the sweep, then like 60 of them will show up and shut that down and says, no, we're not allowing that. They are not a danger. They're not a danger to seniors. They're not a danger to kids. All of these horrific ideas that you keep passing, we know these people. They're our neighbors, and we're not going to allow you to do that. That's a step in the right direction.
That sounds like the Black Panthers.
Well,
that sounds pretty cool. That
Yeah.
sounds pretty cool.
well, we get that influence. My parents,
That's great. That's great. Okay, so I have a question for Ktown For All. And so you talked briefly about how it was formed. Can you tell us a little bit more about how it was formed? who are the members, the diversity of the membership?
Yeah, so it was formed in May 2018. We met literally on the streets during the protests, and we didn't really come from an organizing background or an activism background. We just live in the community in Koreatown, and we decided to do something about it. And I think one of the co-founders, Mike Dickerson, he got involved because he was on his way to GameStop to buy Donkey Kong, and he saw the protest, and he saw Johnny Lee, and that's when he connected with Johnny.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, the organization is mostly Koreatown stakeholders, a lot of residents, and so it's become like this really tight-knit community. We always see each other like on the streets, and it's become like a social club essentially as well. So if you want like a K-Town social club, you should hang out with us, and we do outreach. We're always talking to each other, and then we do have happy hours like after outreach. So if you are feeling apprehensive about doing like the actual outreach, you can join us for happy hour and get burgers or whatever. So the membership is it's skewed towards like the younger generation, like a lot of millennials, but we welcome people of all backgrounds. So we even had like elderly people come and do outreach with us. And so we welcome people of all backgrounds, experiences, skills, and we're really trying to expand our language capacity as well. So we encounter so many people who on the streets whose language is not English, their first language is not English. And so having someone with Korean language abilities or Spanish is really helpful to help us connect to that. And yeah, if you have any skill, you can plug into Ktown For All and help us build this movement.
Okay, so I mean, it sounds like, well, first of all, I think the origin story is pretty amazing. I mean, it wasn't like, it just happened so organically.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's super organic. I didn't know any of those people, and now they're like my best friends.
That's really cool. That's really cool. In terms of, let's say someone hears about this and wondering, okay, what can I as an individual do? So, what do you think, a sympathetic person, an interested person can do as an individual to, push this through to, work towards eradicating, homelessness in Los Angeles?
Well, they could start. One of the things that I have noticed is a lot of attention I've been getting, and I am flattered about it. I like doing it, but understand, I am unhoused. I bed down in the park every night. So to do a podcast every week is like a gargantuan task, and it's on a limited financial resources. So if you really want to help me expand, go on to my SoundCloud or my PayPal and donate. It's great that a lot of people love it, but this is a lot of labor. This is literally a job. I'm doing 3 jobs: surviving, trying to keep it together in the park, and then I'm going to far-flung encampments. It's because unhoused people are in so many different areas, and I'm interviewing with unhoused people in Spain. I'm interviewing them in Greece. I mean, it's just like it's becoming more and more into people hearing it from like Tasmania. It's like it's starting to really pick up. So I need to have a little help from my friends.
I think one concrete way for anyone to start getting involved is to understand what sweeps are, and also how to be present for a sweep so that you see them being done rightfully, or as rightfully as possible. Like in the first iterations of sweeps, like even up until last year, you would see law enforcement officers alongside these sanitation teams. Or in rare cases, it might even just be LAPD themselves, which is illegal. But there's sweep notices that go out ahead of time in different languages. And as a housed resident in your neighborhood, it's great to be able to identify what those look like, and also know and kind of figure out like who is affected by those areas in which sweeps are going to happen. And then also, if you're available, be on the ground to record, to document, to hold the teams accountable for what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. And if you're on social media, share it. But yeah, it starts, a lot of the worsening issues around homelessness can start from something as sweeps, because that's where a lot of the personal property does get thrown away because it's considered trash. And then that's where a lot of affected people lose some of their most personal items, which includes any form of identification that they have. Yeah, I think that's my one way, like, you can start getting involved, is just like watch those streets and watch for those sweeps.
Are there any, is there like a social media, some kind of outlet where people can go and learn, okay, so I need to show up here at this time? Or some kind of organization, or?
Yeah, so we're partnered with Streetwatch LA.
Streetwatch, okay.
Yeah, and it's a citywide network of people who document sweeps, advocate against policies that criminalize homelessness. And Services Not Sweeps is a coalition of over 40 organizations throughout the city of Los Angeles. Follow us on social media.
And Michael Kokos, he does an excellent job of putting, I have to say, I always used to joke around and says, if he will find the pimple on a mosquito's nose, if he is that, he's that great. Michael Kokos, podcast.org, he gives out the sweep information.
Okay.
As soon as he gets it, he'll let you know. He highlights it, he'll put the copies. So he's a good resource as well.
But well, beyond the sweeps, I think just talking to your neighbors and finding out what their specific needs are, because everyone has different needs. So some of our neighbors, they are starting like a recycling enterprise in which they are asking members of the community in Koreatown to bring recycling items so that they can recycle them for money, and sharing like stories of people with their permission, obviously, and amplifying their voices.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming and educating and informing us. Is there any last message you would like to share for the viewers?
We the Unhoused on SoundCloud and Spotify, and if you want to donate, please donate Theodore Henderson PayPal.
And if you want to get involved with Ktown For All, we do outreach at 2 p.m. We meet at Emmanuel Presbyterian Church every Saturday except the first Saturday of the month. And you can sign up to our mailing list at ktownforall.org. And look for us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. It's Ktown For All, so FOR.
Thank you so much.
Else?
Thank you.
Okay.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.